In a shocking move, a Chinese consul publicly warned about beheading Japan's prime minister.
Vicious words being exchanged between the two countries.
The dirty head that sticks itself in must be cut off. Things turned so ugly that China has warned Japan of a crushing defeat and even issued a travel advisory warning its citizens not to visit Japan.
Sanae Takaichi says an armed attack on the island would be a survival-threatening situation.
The only reason Japan pissed China off so much is because it hit China's most sensitive nerve. Not once, but twice. It's so sensitive it would hate getting it exposed on YouTube and would try to bury it in the algorithm. Except you can help us by clicking on the like button. Thank you. The storm began brewing a few months ago with a political shift. On October 21st, 2025, Sanae Takaichi became Japan's first female prime minister. At 64 years old, she stepped into power at a time when Japan's politics were unstable and the world around it was becoming tense. Within just a few days after taking office, she announced an unexpected plan. Japan would speed up its plan to spend 2% of its GDP on defense by the end of 2025, instead of waiting until 2027. That number may sound small, but for Japan, this was historic. For more than 40 years, Japan has followed an unwritten rule. Its defense spending should stay around 1% of its GDP. It was a symbol of its pacifist identity after World War II. So when Prime Minister Takaichi decided to double that target, it wasn't just a financial change, but a sign that Japan's mindset was shifting. This seemed aggressive, but it's not the real reason behind the current chaos, because that began with a statement that hurt China to its core. The new prime minister said that if China attacks Taiwan, Japan will not stay silent and may even deploy its self-defense forces to protect its security. This was Japan's firm stance on Taiwan, and the first reason it pissed off China the most. Experts say Japan seemed too overconfident, and believe it or not, Japan has less chances to stand against China. But in reality, Japan has a good reason to be so firm against the mighty dragon. For 2025, Japan approved a record $55 billion military budget, the largest in its modern history and almost a 10% jump from the previous year. When other security-related expenses like the Coast Guard are included, the total crosses $62 billion. For a country that once avoided anything that looked like military expansion, this was a bold move. But it's not just about the money. Japan also began reorganizing how its military works. In March of 2025, the government created a new Joint Operations Command, a central body that combines the work of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and even space and cyber units. It's the first time Japan has ever had a unified defense command. The goal is to make communication faster and coordination smoother, especially in cases of a crisis. But the real game-changing moves were made by the mammoth standing behind it. The United States quickly supported this step. Washington upgraded U.S. Forces Japan into a joint force headquarters, making it easier for both countries to plan and operate together. At the same time, Japan started modernizing its weapons and technology. In March, Japanese naval ships began Tomahawk missile training with the U.S. Navy. These are long-range cruise missiles that can strike targets over 600 miles away. Japan has decided to buy around 400 Tomahawks, which will give it a much stronger defensive reach. It's also working on new hypersonic weapons and improving its own missile systems. These moves show that Japan is no longer relying on traditional defense. It is preparing for advanced, modern warfare. Prime Minister Takaichi has also made defense and diplomacy work side by side. She calls the Japan-US alliance the cornerstone of national security and wants closer partnerships with friendly nations across Asia. Japan has signed defense agreements with countries like the Philippines and continues to cooperate with Australia, South Korea, and India through the Quad Alliance. The message is clear. Japan wants to stand stronger in a changing world, not in isolation. Seems like Japan from a parallel universe, right? After all, it used to be seen as a symbol of peace, a nation that rebuilt itself from the ashes of war and focused on technology, trade, and progress instead of weapons. But now that image is starting to change. Quietly, Japan is preparing for something bigger. This is not a decision taken at midnight, but due to major changes and provocations happening around this island nation since decades. Japan realized that the peace it had enjoyed for almost 80 years was now surrounded by real threats from three directions: China, Russia, and North Korea. And these three countries did not grow aggressive overnight. Their actions kept increasing year after year, until Japan finally decided that silence and patience is no longer the best option. What looks like a recent escalation with China is in reality decades-old battles that are still being fought today. Over the past 15 years, China has expanded its power in every direction. At sea, in the air, and across Asia, and almost all of that expansion pushes directly against Japan's security. A part of this story begins with the Senkaku Islands, a small group of uninhabited islands in the East China Sea that Japan controls, but China claims. In 2012, when Japan bought 3 of these islands to manage them peacefully, China responded aggressively and started sending ships into the area. These were not normal fishing boats, but government vessels. What began as a rare visit slowly grew into an almost daily presence. By 2024, Chinese ships were there nearly every single day of the year. During the same period, China quietly transformed its Coast Guard by placing it under military authority and expanding its fleet with larger, heavier armed vessels. These ships look like law enforcement boats, but they acted like military units, giving China a way to increase pressure without openly starting conflict. But China's ambitions went far beyond these islands, and sadly Japan could hardly do anything about it. China began building the world's fastest growing navy, expanding so quickly that in just a few years, it added more ships than Japan, India, Australia, France, and the UK combined. It upgraded its missile systems, including long-range anti-ship weapons and new hypersonic designs, which made the region more dangerous for any navy operating near China's coast. China also grew more active around Taiwan, flying fighter jets, drones, and surveillance aircraft across the Taiwan Strait almost daily. Since Taiwan sits directly next to Japan's Southwest Islands, any tension there becomes a direct security issue for Tokyo. If China ever moves against Taiwan, Japan knows the conflict will likely spill into its waters and airspace. At the same time, China expanded its reach towards the Philippines, pushing into the South China Sea with a mix of Coast Guard ships, maritime militia, and naval vessels. This matters to Japan because these sea lanes connect Japan to its trade routes and energy supplies. If China dominates this area, it gains leverage over the entire region. And then came the large-scale military drills. In late 2024, China launched its biggest exercise in 30 years. More than 90 ships and over 100 aircraft, practicing blockades, invasions, and coordinated strikes across almost the entire First Island chain, from the South China Sea all the way up to the waters near Japan. For Tokyo, this was a signal that China was preparing for real conflict scenarios, not just simple training. China's behavior in the air also changed. Japanese jets scrambled hundreds of times a year to intercept Chinese fighters, bombers, and drones flying close to Japanese territory. In August of 2024, Japan recorded its first ever Chinese military aircraft entering its airspace, even if only for a short time. Chinese drones began flying more frequently too, reaching new areas that they had never approached before. These flights forced Japan to stay on constant alert and proved that China was testing how far it could push. And as if China was not enough, its allies stepped in too. This was something even more worrying: deepening military cooperation between China and Russia. In 2025, both countries held joint submarine and naval exercises near Japan, sharing sonar data and practicing operations together in waters critical to Japan's defenses. For Tokyo, this meant challenges were no longer coming from one direction, but from 2 major powers moving in the same direction. And while all this happened, China unveiled its most advanced aircraft carrier, the Fujian, equipped with electromagnetic catapults that allow fighter jets to take off with full payloads, extending China's ability to project power farther into the Pacific. Combined with its missile systems, drone fleets, and Coast Guard pressure, China now has the tools to challenge the balance of power across Japan's entire neighborhood, from the East China Sea to Taiwan to the South China Sea. And right now, China is enraged because of the Taiwan issue. Or that's what it's trying to show the world to hide the real intention. On paper, China's anger is all about Taiwan. But beneath the surface, it's the decades-old scars Japan carved into China. The scars that still whisper the same cry across generations: revenge. It's so deeply rooted in them that in 2024, a 10-year-old child was fatally stabbed in China. That wasn't a normal day. It was an emotionally charged day, commemorated with sirens and moments of silence across the country, the silence born from Japan's past actions. But the dynamics which we see today between Japan and China were not always like this. What is seen as being oppressed was actually one of the most aggressive military powers in Asia. Everything started to change in the 1930s, when Japan's leaders believed that expanding the empire was the only way to secure resources and survive tough economic times. This thinking pushed Japan into a violent path, especially towards China. In 1937, the Marco Polo Bridge incident turned into a full-scale war between Japan and China. What followed was brutal. Japanese forces captured major cities one after another: Beijing, Tianjin, Shanghai, and eventually the capital, Nanjing. And the fall of Nanjing led to one of the darkest chapters of the war: the Nanjing Massacre. For 6 long weeks, the city saw mass killings, rape, and destruction on a horrifying scale. Historians estimate that more than 100,000 civilians and prisoners of war were killed. It was a moment that deeply damaged Japan's reputation and is still remembered across the world. It's the same scar that China still carries, alive and burning. Around the same time, Japan was also running secret operations like Unit 731 in Manchuria. This facility carried out inhumane experiments on prisoners, testing diseases, biological weapons, and even performing surgeries without anesthesia. These war crimes became a major reason why Japan later faced strict punishment and global pressure after the war. With its military already spread across China, Korea, and parts of Southeast Asia, Japan still kept expanding. In 1941, after the United States cut off Japan's oil supply, Japan made a bold and dangerous choice: attack the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. The surprise attack destroyed American ships and killed more than 2,000 people. This one event pulled the United States directly into World War II and changed the entire direction of the war. For a short time, Japan kept winning battles and controlled a massive empire across Asia. But by 1942, things started to fall apart. Japan's navy suffered a major defeat at the Battle of Midway, and from that point, the empire began shrinking. By 1945, Japan was exhausted. Cities were bombed, food was running out, and millions of lives had already been lost. Then came the final blow. In August of 1945, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs, one on Hiroshima and one on Nagasaki. The destruction was unlike anything the world had ever seen before. At the same time, the Soviet Union invaded Japanese-held territory in Manchuria. With no way to continue the war, Emperor Hirohito finally announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945. For many Japanese people, this was the first time they had ever heard their emperor's voice. After Japan surrendered, the country came under Allied occupation, led mainly by the United States. American forces stayed in Japan for almost 7 years. And during this period, they worked to completely dismantle the old military system. Many top military leaders were arrested and tried for war crimes in Tokyo. Several were sentenced to death, and others received life sentences. Interestingly, the emperor himself was not punished. The US believed keeping him as a symbol would help maintain stability in Japan. The biggest change came in 1947, when a brand new constitution was introduced. One article inside of it, Article 9, completely transformed Japan's future. It said Japan would never again use war to settle disputes, and it would not keep land, air, or naval forces with the power to wage war. This was a historic shift, and it laid the foundation for Japan's identity as a peaceful nation. However, the world soon changed. The Korean War broke out in 1950, and the Cold War tensions escalated. The United States needed a stable Japan to help maintain order in Asia. So Japan slowly started rebuilding limited self-defense units. Over time, these units grew into what we now know as the Japan Self-Defense Forces. They were still strictly defensive, but they became an important part of Japan's security. During that same period, Japan signed major security agreements with the United States, allowing military bases to remain in the country. Many Japanese people were uncomfortable with this, and huge protests took place in the 1960s. But the treaty remained, and even today US forces are stationed in Japan under this agreement. And while Japan was adjusting politically, something incredible was happening economically. The country rebuilt its industries, invested in technology, and worked hard to revive its economy. By the 1960s and 1970s, Japan shocked the world with rapid economic growth. In just a few decades, it went from a defeated nation to one of the world's strongest economies. This period became known as the Japanese economic miracle. This success, along with the painful memories of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, helped to shape Japan's pacifist mindset. Generations of Japanese children grew up learning about peace, democracy, and the dangers of nationalism. Over time, Japan created a unique national identity, a nation proud not of its military, but of its commitment to peace. But its neighbors forced the shift. Not for now, but for history's unfinished business. While Japan was dealing with constant pressure from China in the south, another challenge was forming quietly in the north. Japan and Russia never solved their decades-old dispute over the Kuril Islands, or the Northern Territories, as Japan calls them. These islands lie just a short distance from Hokkaido, and after World War II, they were taken by the Soviet Union. Even today, more than 80 years later, the two countries still don't have a peace treaty because of this unresolved issue. For many years, the situation stayed calm, almost frozen in time. But things changed after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. Japan sided firmly with the West and imposed sanctions. Russia responded by withdrawing from peace talks, suspending agreements, blocking Japanese fishermen, and then turning the Kuril Islands into a heavily militarized zone. It started building new bases, deploying coastal defense missiles, and strengthening air defense systems across the islands. Russia even stationed advanced S-300V4 units there, systems built to detect and track stealth aircraft like Japan's F-35s, giving Moscow the ability to monitor large parts of northern Japan. Things were expected to become stable, but instead the military activity increased. Russian ships and aircraft began appearing more frequently near Japanese territory. There were close aerial encounters, long-range bomber patrols, and even nuclear-capable Tu-95 bombers flying near Japan's air defense zones. In September of 2024, a Russian Il-38 patrol aircraft crossed into Japan's airspace 3 separate times within a few hours, the first violation of its kind in 5 years. Japan scrambled F-35s and F-15s and even fired signal flares, the strongest possible warning before engagement. At sea, Russia expanded submarine patrols with its Borei-class ballistic missile submarines, each carrying powerful nuclear missiles. These submarines began operating more often in the Sea of Japan and the Sea of Okhotsk, creating constant tension near Japan's northern waters. What concerned Tokyo even more was Russia's close partnership with China. Both countries began coordinating naval patrols, bomber flights, and even submarine exercises around Japan. In some cases, the ships circled Japan completely, testing how quickly Tokyo would react. For Japan, this was a new kind of pressure. 2 powerful neighbors working side by side in the waters surrounding the country. And Russia added another layer of uncertainty by updating its nuclear doctrine in 2024. Lowering the threshold for when it might use nuclear weapons, a change that made Tokyo even more cautious. All of this showed Japan that the northern threat was no longer symbolic or historical. It was real, active, and growing. And Japan had to prepare for a world where challenges were rising from both the south and the north at the same time. But Russia and China are way less dangerous than the biggest threat, because what you can never predict is often your biggest threat. Imagine a nuke flying over you just because someone thought of having an adventure. It sounds pretty crazy, but that's what the Japanese have been facing lately. North Korea is the most unpredictable challenge that Japan faces. Because unlike China or Russia, Pyongyang openly identifies Japan as a nuclear target. Japan's own defense reports say that North Korea now has around 50 nuclear weapons and has already miniaturized warheads small enough to fit on ballistic missiles. On top of that, North Korea has hundreds of missiles that can strike anywhere in Japan, including more than 50 Nodong missiles that can be launched with very little preparation. This makes every test and every launch more dangerous, because Japan only has a short warning window, sometimes just a few minutes, before the impact. And the most frightening moments are when North Korean missiles fly directly over Japan, triggering emergency alerts, halting trains, and forcing people to take shelter. These aren't rare events anymore. After brief diplomacy in 2018 and 2019, North Korea returned to testing at record speed, launching over 60 missiles in 2022 and dozens more in 2023. Many of these launches were timed to match military exercises involving the US, Japan, and South Korea, adding a layer of political messaging to the danger. What makes the threat even more serious is how much North Korea's technology has advanced. It now shows off tactical nuclear warheads designed for battlefield use, underwater drones meant to carry nuclear payloads, and submarine-launched missiles that give it second strike capability. Its long-range missile tests have broken records too, with some staying in the air for more than an hour and reaching altitudes no previous tests had ever reached. The unveiling of the new Hwasong-20 missile, solid fuel, fast to launch, and capable of carrying multiple warheads, pushed concerns even further. And then there's the political shift. North Korea has grown closer to Russia, signing a defense pact and reportedly sending troops and weapons to support Moscow. With this new partnership, North Korea's actions sometimes line up with Chinese and Russian military activities around Japan, creating the feeling of coordinated pressure from all sides. For Japan, the combination of nuclear capability, fast-moving technology, and total unpredictability makes North Korea a threat unlike any other in the region. But Japan seems to have cracked the answers for them fast. What has pissed off its enemies the most is the potential nukes Japan might use. The peaceful country that rejected nuclear weapons for decades is now rethinking that promise. For the first time since World War II, lawmakers are discussing whether Japan should allow the entry of nuclear weapons from Allied forces during a crisis. Chinese spokesman Lin Jian reacted, saying China was seriously concerned regarding the stand. This was the second reason, after Japan's stand on Taiwan, that gave China sleepless nights. Japan's future defense strategy is not about one weapon or one announcement, it is a complete transformation of how the country plans to survive in a far more dangerous neighborhood. After decades of keeping its military small and limited, Japan has accepted that the security environment around it has just changed too much. The new plan stretches over 10 years and is built on one idea. Japan must be able to detect threats early, defend itself for long periods, and reach the enemy before the enemy reaches Japan. The shift began with an historic decision in late 2022, when the government approved a 5-year defense program worth about 43 trillion yen, or over $300 billion. No Japanese government has ever committed this much money to defense in such a short span. The spending is not random. It is distributed across 7 capability areas that Japan believes are essential if it wants to protect itself against China's naval power, Russia's missile systems, and North Korea's nuclear arsenal. The first major pillar is a long-range strike capability, something Japan avoided for more than 70 years. For most of its post-war history, Japan kept a strictly defensive posture, meaning it only prepared to intercept attacks but never planned to strike enemy bases. That changed when Tokyo decided to purchase 400 Tomahawk cruise missiles from the US. These missiles can hit targets over 1,600 kilometers or about 1,000 miles away, giving Japan the ability to target launch sites, military bases, and logistics hubs long before a threat gets close to its islands. Japanese destroyers have already begun training, and the first ship is expected to become fully operational with Tomahawks soon. But Japan is not relying only on imports. It is upgrading its own Type 12 missiles, a system that once had short range but is now being redesigned to reach close to 1,000 kilometers. These upgraded missiles will be deployed across Japan's southwestern islands, from Kyushu all the way to Okinawa, creating a chain of launch points that can monitor and respond to activity across the East China Sea. Many of these launch vehicles are mobile, meaning they can move quickly and hide, making them harder for an enemy to target. Japan is also working on a new generation of submarine-launched missiles. Instead of modifying its submarines heavily, Japan created missiles that can be fired through standard torpedo tubes. This makes them cheaper, faster to deploy, and difficult to detect. It gives Japan the option to conduct long-range strikes quietly beneath the ocean's surface. Parallel to this, Japan will also equip its fighter jets with long-range air-launched missiles, which multiply the number of platforms capable of responding to threats. A second pillar of Japan's future strategy is layered missile defense, especially against the newest class of missiles, that is, hypersonic missiles. These weapons travel extremely fast and can change direction mid-air, making them difficult to intercept with traditional systems. To deal with this, Japan and the United States are jointly developing a Glide Phase Interceptor, a special missile designed to hit hypersonic weapons while they are still gliding in the upper atmosphere. It is one of the most challenging technologies in modern warfare, and only the US and Japan are currently developing it together. Japan is also expanding its naval missile defense fleet. 2 massive Aegis-equipped vessels are being built, each carrying more than 100 vertical launch cells and high-powered radar. These will work alongside the existing Aegis destroyers, increasing Japan's ability to track and intercept ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and even hypersonic threats. By the end of the decade, Japan is expected to operate 12 major ships capable of ballistic missile defense. This is important because threats in the region are not limited to one direction. Japan needs wide coverage across the north, south, and the west. The third major area is unmanned and space-based surveillance. Japan wants to stop depending only on ground-based radars and begin gathering intelligence from higher altitudes and from space. New long-range drones will patrol over large stretches of ocean, staying in the sky for longer periods and providing real-time information to the self-defense forces. Japan is also expanding its satellite network. These satellites help detect missile launches, track naval activity, monitor North Korean test sites, and provide secure communications to commanders. Japan is building reconnaissance satellites, communications satellites, and even a new system to monitor activities in space itself. Important because both China and Russia now have anti-satellite capabilities. All of this information will flow into Japan's new Joint Operations Command, a centralized headquarters created in 2025. For the first time in its history, Japan has a single command structure connecting the Army, Navy, Air Force, cyber units, and space units. This makes decision-making faster, especially in a crisis where minutes matter. The US military has upgraded its own command in Japan to match this structure, so both countries can coordinate operations more smoothly. Japan's future plans also focus heavily on mobility and preparedness. One lesson from recent wars is that technology alone is not enough. A country must be able to move troops quickly, protect civilians, reinforce infrastructure, and maintain supplies for long periods. Japan is investing billions into ammunition reserves, hardened shelters, fuel storage, emergency airfields, and backup communication systems. This ensures that Japan can stay operational even if attacks damage major bases or supply routes. Civil protection is also being upgraded, from early warning sirens to evacuation plans for residents living close to potential conflict zones. A key long-term part of Japan's strategy is the next-generation fighter jet, being developed with the United Kingdom and Italy under the Global Combat Air Program. This aircraft, expected to arrive around 2035, will replace Japan's old fighter jets and bring more advanced sensors, stealth technology, artificial intelligence, and network-centric warfare features. The new jet is designed to operate not just alone, but as part of a larger web of drones, satellites, and ground-based systems. Space will also play a bigger role. Japan has dramatically increased its investment in military satellites, building a more resilient network for communications, navigation, and intelligence. The shift is meant to ensure that Japan can function independently even if global communication networks are disrupted during a conflict. All of these efforts rely heavily on alliances. The US-Japan partnership remains the core of Japan's strategy, but Tokyo is widening its network, working closely with Australia, South Korea, India, and the Philippines. These partnerships include military exercises, intelligence sharing, technology cooperation, and agreements that allow troops to access each other's bases during emergencies. Together, they form a growing security web, meant to counter the combined pressure from Russia, China, and North Korea. Japan's timelines for these upgrades stretches into the mid-2030s, and by 2035, the new fighter jets and hypersonic interceptors are expected to bring Japan's defense capabilities to a level it has never reached before. Inside the country, the mood is mixed. Many people, especially the younger generation, believe it's time Japan takes responsibility for its own security. They see the growing instability in the world and feel the country needs to be ready. But older generations who grew up hearing stories from World War II, well, they feel uneasy. They remember what militarization once brought: destruction, loss, and pain. Still, the political direction is set. Japan's defense policy is changing faster than ever. The government is spending more, organizing better, and training harder. The self-defense forces are becoming more capable, and the country is preparing for threats that might come its way. What Japan is building is not a temporary fix. It is a long-term, multi-layered defense system designed to survive modern warfare, from missile barrages to cyber attacks to long-range naval operations. It aims to give Japan enough strength that no single country can intimidate it, and no combination of neighbors can corner it. This is Japan's answer to the world it sees emerging, one where peace must be protected, not by hope, but by preparation.